gari sari dari re sari da pada sari da pa ma ga pada sari re ga gari sari dari re sari da pada sari da pa ma ga pada re sa da ga gari sari dari re sari da pada sari da pa ma ga re ga pada pa ma ga re ga pada sari da pada sari re ga sari da sa ni da pa ma
Good evening, everyone. The song you heard was the first of 20. This is a cluster of poems which are called Thiruvempavai. Now, we are in Margari and we tend to think that this is the season only for Andal. Because she is loved, she is so popular, and her 30 Tirupavais are sung early morning, and it speaks about this young girl Andal, this poet, telling all her friends to wake up in her community. Well, this song you just heard is quite similar. It was written almost maybe 100 years later, but it carries the same tone. Here, the poet, this time male, writes in the feminine tense, but he also says, young girls, wake up, don't sleep any longer, because it's time to extol and adore and admire the Great One here meaning Shiva. So I want to welcome you to what I promise is going to be a very interesting chat with someone who's not a stranger to all our Instagram viewers, Professor Madhusudhan Kalaichelvan. He has been with us last year and when he spoke about Andal and the miracles. Today he's going to share with us the works of a remarkable Shaiva poet called Manikavachakar, who lived a century after Andal, but whose 20 Pasharams have a remarkable similarity. And this is what we're going to discuss, not just the amazing life of this remarkable person, his moment of epiphany when Shiva entered his being, but also the points of confluence and departure between the Tirupavai and the Thiruvempavai. So let me welcome Professor Madhusudhan Kalaichelvan to our conversation today. Madhu, welcome and thank you so much for being with us.
Vanakkam and a very good evening, and thank you, Akka. This is a wonderful opportunity to be talking about something that I really like to talk about.
Well, all I have to do is get you started on Shiva, and I know that is an absolute preoccupation with you. But it is so interesting when you read the first of the Thiruvempavai Pasarams, and then you compare it to Andal's Margari Tingal, where she sets the tone for waking up her friends. And so it's the same way that this tends to begin, right? But before we go into the Thiruvempavai and the Tirupavai, Manikavachakar himself is quite a remarkable person. So why don't you give our viewers a brief like a, brushstroke sketch of who he was, the family, who he worked for, and that moment of epiphany?
Sure. So Manikavachakar, as one of the most popular Shaivite saint poets, probably belonged to the 9th century. There's a lot of confusion about the date, the period to which he belonged, but arguably, academically speaking, he should have been active during the middle of the 9th century. That's, as you said, a century and a half or a little close to that more than Andal. He was from this community of Brahmins called as Amadhyas, the Amadhya Brahmanas. That's like a community of Brahmins who've had their expertise in Dharma Shastras, Vaidya Shastra, and on weapons and warfare, all that. So in a way they were attached to the king's governance part of it, and they played a very vital role in as being advisors and ministers to kings. He was born in the outskirts of Madurai in a beautiful village called Tiruvadavur, and he rises up to the power of being a very popular minister to the second Varaguna Pandya, the Pandya king who was ruling in the middle of the 9th century. The king was very fond of him, took him for all important decisions, considered him, consulted him. And one such assignment on Manikavachakar was to travel to the east coast and procure horses that have just landed from the Middle East. And, good horses that could probably add value to the Pandya army.
Arabian horses were so prized.
Yep, they were very popular then.
Yes.
And so he was on his journey, on his professional assignment with a lot of money in his hand and accompanied by more people and the security guards, and he was on his way to East Coast when he camped in this beautiful village called Tirupperunturai. As the name goes, it had a nice tank. It was on the banks of a tank, and it was a calm, nice village. When he was staying there, camping there, one early morning, he woke up to some very auspicious sound, and he started walking by himself. And somewhere in the distance, all he saw was a silhouette of a large tree, and just beneath the tree there was a yogi with his, the matted hair locks and smeared with vibhuti and rudraksham. He was seated there with a very calm face, lecturing to his disciples. That was the moment Manikavachakar decided that he has this person who owns him. He just fell at his feet, cried for acceptance, and said, he just declared, well, I found my master. It was a very unique way of recognizing your mentor, your guru, and it was pretty strong an impact on Manikavachakar. Seldom it happens. Just by the sight, he didn't even strike a conversation. It was just that sight which was enough for him to offer himself, fall at his feet. And it is said that Shiva initiated him in 3 different ways. One was by his divine vision, what is called as Nayana Diksha. And then he touched his head with his hand, and that's called Sparsa Diksha, the touch, the healing touch probably. And then he lifted his lotus feet, rested it on the head of Manikavachakar, and that is what is called as the Tiruvadi Diksha. That was enough for Manikavachakar to pour out his emotions in the choicest of the words, in beautiful Tamil, which was all compiled later. All his experiences which poured out were all compiled into Tiruvachakam. Of course, the story does not get over there. Manikavachakar spends all the money, the government money, the king's money, on building a beautiful, magnificent temple for Shiva there. That was his way of offering for all the blessings that he earned there. And the people who came along with him were confused because he is the chief minister. If he is going to decide on something, they'll have to keep quiet there. But they were also worried about the king's decision, so they rushed back to the kingdom, informed the king about what happened. The king commissioned Manikavachakar to the court. Not knowing how to deal with the king, Manikavachakar approached his guru, who said, on this particular day, promise him that the horses will be there, would have reached Madurai. Taking that as the word, Manikavachakar comes back to the court, tells to his king that on this day the horses will be here. However, a series of miracles followed, and end of it, Manikavachakar renounced all the earthly pleasure that he had in hand and took up preaching and trying to understand Shiva first and preaching it out to the people as his mission, and started on his pilgrimage. From Madurai, he travels to several important Shaivite shrines like Tiruvannamalai, Kanchipuram, Tiruvarur, Sirgali, and finally reaches Chidambaram, Tillai, and that was the chosen place for him to stay. He builds a small ashram for himself, stays there, visits the temple. A few miracles also happened there, he has a debate with the Buddhists who've sailed all the way from Sri Lanka to actually strike a debate with him, and he wins over them also. Establishes the power of Shaivite traditions and finally merges with the Lord in his hall of consciousness, the Chit Sabai or Chidambaram as it is called. And the best part of it is Shiva wanted to ensure that his works were not lost. So he comes down, offers to be his scribe, promises to be his scribe, and sits next to him and gets all his songs on a palm leaf manuscript, compiles them, signs it. He signs his name on it. He says, Azhagiya Thiruchitrambalumudayan Eduthu. So all this has been scribed by this person who's called as Azhagiya Thiruchitrambalumudayan, who's none but Nataraja himself, leaves them at the doorstep of Chidambaram temple for the Dikshitars or the priests to discover it the next day morning, and Manikavachakar finally merges with the Lord there at Chidambaram. So that's his life in a capsule.
That's a remarkable life, Madhu, but I want you to tell the audience, he spends all the king's money, builds a temple. Now he has to have been punished. So what happened in the punishment? A miracle happened then.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
A series of miracles, in fact, most of which is a part of what is called as Thiruvilayadal Puranam, the 64 divine sports of Shiva in Madurai that he performed in Madurai. So Manikavachakar is commissioned and he's inquired. However, Shiva ensures that the horses reaches the kingdom, the stables. Shiva himself comes as the horseman and hands over the horses to the king. The king is pretty satisfied. They were good breed horses there, and so the horses were taken into the stables. That night, the horses the horses were basically foxes from the outskirts of Madurai, from the jungles of Madurai, that by a miracle were made to look like horses. That night, they turn again into foxes and jackals, and they start haunting the city and wounding people there. And so it was a riot. So Manikavachakar was again questioned. He was prisoned. He was also tortured, asking for what was all the reason behind whatever was happening in Madurai. He was cornered, and he had no idea too. It was all miracles as per Shiva's order, and so he was tortured. He was laid flat on the hot sand of the riverbed of Madurai, and that was when Shiva brought him. He ensured that Madurai, the Vaigai river flooded to console Manikavachakar and to teach the Pandya king a lesson, to tell out to the world who Manikavachakar was. So there was a sudden flood. So the Pandya king had no other go. He tried his best to control the floods, but no mechanism helped. So he came out with an idea to ensure that one person from each family dedicated themselves to raise the bank of the river, to embank the river and to strengthen the banks. And that is when there was this old lady called Vandi, a resident of Madurai. She was living all by herself. She was a spinster. She was making a living out of selling baked rice flour, puttu as we call it in Tamil. It's a traditional regional delicacy here. So she sold puttu and she was making a living out of it. She had no one else to help her to perform her part of the duty as per the order of the king. So she prays to Shiva. Shiva comes down as a helper. So all that she had to offer him was a plate full of puttu. Shiva had that and he went. He was supposed to, play his part by helping her. He went, he fell asleep. The Pandya king was on his inspection duty along with his ministers. That's when he sees Shiva laying flat there. He was sleeping. And he gives him one pat with the rod that he had in his hand, and that was experienced by all of them, including the king himself.
So the king strikes this man, and then he feels the stroke on himself.
Him.
Okay.
And the ministers, his queens, everybody basically. So all living beings, in fact, that's what the Puranam says. So it was Shiva who experienced it, and that which gets, it kind of resonates within all of us. And that's when he realizes that it was all Shiva's divine sport to tell out to the world who Manikavachakar was, and he requests him to stay with him as his minister. But Manikavachakar at that moment thinks that he has a more vital role to play, and so he feels that his responsibilities were higher than just being an advisor to the king. So he renounces all that he had in hand, takes up Shaiva Diksha, and he is on his pilgrimage.
Madhu, did you know, of course you knew, but I think the audience must know, that by the 14th century, Tamil literature had also traveled across the waters to Thailand and to Southeast Asia. And until the early 20th century, there was a swing ceremony every year, which they called Tiruvambavai. And they would chant, yes, for the royal family. So they would imagine Shiva on the swing with his consort, and they would offer fruits and vegetables and flowers, and they would chant the Tiruvambave and verses also from the Tirupave, in the belief that if Shiva was happy, then the land would be prosperous. So until I think when there was a big accident and then it became too expensive during the World War, that ceremony was stopped. But the influence of Manikavachakar traveled across the oceans. But my question next is, would you think that definitely Andal's Tirupave influenced Manikavachakar's Tiruvambave?
To an extent, yes, but I think even before Andal conceptualized the Pavai Nonbu, the spending the 30 days in thinking about Krishna and actually observing a Vratam, I think this was a tradition that dates back to the Sangam period.
For young unmarried girls. Yeah, to wake early and observe this vow of waking up early, having a bath. Andal, of course, also endorses a certain kind of austerity, which Manikavachakar doesn't. But it's like if it needed to be young unmarried girls to do this for the sake of the welfare of their families and the village.
More so for the community.
And the community.
The community, because the earliest reference to a concept like this is from Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, wherein there's this Vratam called as Katyayani Vratam, which was observed again by young unmarried women to propitiate and to please Katyayani Devi, who is the guarding deity of Mathura and Vrindavana. So the women there observed this vow, and Krishna was apparently put in charge of guarding the women who were out of their houses early in the morning and to walk all the way up to Yamuna banks and take a dip there. And the women were only looking for a chance to be around with Krishna. And so this was a blessing in disguise for them. One part of it was observing the Vratam. The second was, the role of the Jivatma, at a philosophical note, the role of the Jivatma to keep earning for a moment to be along with the Paramatma, Krishna in this case. The women were blessed, so they had a dual purpose. They enjoyed their time with Krishna, to be around with him, to please him, to sing for him, to dance with him, and also took a bath in the Yamuna river and observed the Katyayani Vratam. Andal, who should have definitely heard the stories of Bhagavatam from her father, Periyalvar, should have been inspired or even influenced by this concept of young unmarried women observing this Vratam, which gave them a scope to be around with Krishna. All that she wanted was to be around with him. If this was a choice, she would have chosen it. So I think it's Andal herself had an influence from the Sangam and the Bhagavatam stories, and Manikavachakar's tradition should have continued from there.
Well, I know that you're not directly attributing Andal's influence on Manikavachakar, but I want to also say that both of them end their pasharams with Yelur Embavai. And Andal, of course, uses the Parai. She asks for the boon, which here we don't see. And Andal had 30 verses, and there are 20 here, but it's also followed by 10 of the waking up songs like the Suprabhadam, Tirupalli Ezhi. Now, Andal's verses have a lot of innocent, I would say, exuberance and color, because she brings in mythology, she brings in Krishna and Rama and their feats, of destroying Lanka and Ravana, the demons. Whereas here it is, the Tiruvambave is, I would say, more quieter in tone, in that sense, in comparison. And there is, of course, every pasharam has the waking up these girls, which of course Andal does from pasharam 1 to 15. Where would you think that Tiruvambave and Manikavachakar make a departure, if there is? Is there a different kind of a philosophical meaning that the Tiruvambave has as compared to the Tirupave?
First, on the similarities part, I think Tirupave emphasizes on the role of Devi, Shri in this case. The Vaishnavites, the Vaishnavite theory were praying to Mahalakshmi before even entering the shrine of Vishnu. That's a tradition. So here I think with Krishna it's Nappinai Pirati, to whom Andal prays. In fact, she asks Nappinai to gift Krishna to her. Ukkamum Tattoliyum Tandu, Un Manalanayum Tandu. We are well aware that he is your husband there, but please gift him to us. It's not that only you can enjoy your time with him. We are also longing for it. Please gift him to us. This again in Tiruvambave, Manikavachakar. In fact, the title, as you see in the old prints of Tiruvambave, it says Shaktiyai Diyattal, which means being awed by the greatness of Shakti, of Devi here. Shakti is none but Shiva's version of energy. Yeah, I mean, he manifests the energy part of the component of Shiva is Shakti or Devi here. And so there again, Tiruvambavai has Shakti as the central piece, and it all kind of revolves around her. That's not that's one similarity part. Apart from that, you also have differences, of course. Tirupavai, it's considered to be the quintessence of Sri Vaishnava tradition. It's a Shastram by itself. That's why you have so many commentaries from the Vaishnavite commentators, starting from the 11th, 12th century, and there are half a dozen versions, commentaries on Tirupavai, which rightfully is, it shrinks down the complete theory of Vaishnavite tradition, the philosophy there, and it offers it in a very simple format. And the purpose of life, the duties to be performed, how do you reach his heavenly abode, all that is captured. Tiruvambavai on that note isn't that deep on the philosophical side. There are a lot of philosophical aspects, the Shaiva Siddhantam as it reflects in it, but Tirupavai is holistic, it's wholesome. Tiruvambavai, I would say, isn't that deep. It's one part of the Shaiva Siddhantam that it deals with.
Would you now please read any one of the Tiruvambavai Pasharams? I love 14. If you can read it, or whichever you choose,
Okay.
read it in Tamil and then read the English translation.
Sure.
Yeah.
The 14th is about Devi, actually. So, I mean, that's a good choice.
Yeah.
Kadar Kudayada, Paimpoon Kalanada, Kodai Kudalada, Vantin Kudamada, Sida Punaladi, Chitrambalam Padi, Veda Porul Padi, Apporula Maapadi, Sodi Tirampadi, Sood Kontrai Tarpadi, Adi Tirampadi, Andama Maapadi, Pedithu Nammai, Valattadatta Peivalaitan, Pada Tirampadi, Adelor Embavai. Here it is like, sing the greatness of Devi. The earring dancing, worn ornaments dancing, the ladies' plate dancing, the crowd of castes dancing, bathing in the chill water, singing the Tiruchitrambalam, singing the meaning of the Vedas, singing the nature of luminescence, singing the enclading bunch of Kondrai flowers, singing the nature of the source, singing the being of the end, singing the nature of the food of the lady who brought us up. Come, let's bathe.
So the come let's bathe is really quite similar, no? It's the idea of water being a purifier, water being that sense that flows through time. It's actually a very sensual image also, young girls bathing in the early morning in the chill air of the water in Margari season. And this is also a season where we are supposed to be spending our time in contemplation, which is why I think music, dance, festivities and everything that is it has come through time, and it just happens to be a season all over India actually, where there is so much cultural activity. If you were to think about Manikavachakar, what would you think is, Shiva has 5 elements, right? He resides in all the 5. What would be the element that you would ascribe to Manikavachakar?
Well, take his life as a journey. I think all 5 elements will find a place, one part or other, because he merges with Shiva in Akasa Kshetram, which is Chidambaram. Yeah, the ether space, that is. He composes Tiruvambavai in Tiruvannamalai, which is the fire. The eternal fire. In fact, the opening verses of Tiruvambavai goes on to say, Adiyum Antamum Illa Arutperum Sodiyai Yampada. So that, the column of fire, the eternal fire, which has no starting or an ending point, let me try my hands on singing the praise of it. And there are references to the Tiruvannamalai Stalapuranam time and again in the Tiruvambavai composition. So there you have fire. And as you rightly pointed out, yes, water in Shaiva Siddhantam, especially in Tiruvambavai compositions, Devi is considered to be this pool of water in which you take a dip. You cleanse yourself. Devi is the one who's capable of cleansing you, giving you the jnanam that you need, and once you take a dip and come out, you're cleansed both from outside and within. You come out in a level to understand Shiva, get close to him, and attain the oneness. So Devi's role in purifying you is also there in Tiruvambavai. So there you have water. And Prithvi Kshetram, yes, he was in fact a minister to rule, and so there I think Prithvi comes in hand. And so I think all the 5 elements comes in place. But if you want to choose one, I would go for fire. Tiruvambavai having been composed in Tiruvannamalai, and Manikavachakar, I always imagine him as this fire, I mean the intelligence that which is burning and capturing, and in which you lose yourself, in which your ignorance is burnt probably, and you also start glowing. So to me personally, it's Agni that I would associate with Manikavachakar.
Thank you. That's quite a beautiful way of arriving at that element. Why do you think, Madhu, that Tiruvambavai, for all its beauty and its sophistication and elegance, has not become as popular as the Tirupavai?
Okay, I mean, the popularity of Tirupavai, I would, at least to the masses, I would attribute it to Sri Harikudi Ramanujayengar, who composed it, set it to beautiful music.
So relatively recently, you're talking about the 1950s,
yeah,
is when he set it to music, and M.L. Vasantakumari gave voice to it.
It just became a hit. It's there in every house. Everybody would have heard it at some point of time in life. Anybody from Tamil Nadu would have heard it. Tiruvambavai has also been composed, and MLVMR had sung it too, but it didn't reach out to the masses, reason for which I'm not sure. However, Tiruvambavai had this capacity to influence and inspire a lot of philosophers, not just from India, from the West also. The English philosophers and the European philosophers, in fact. And if there is one book that which hit strong on the philosophers to understand what they consider to be Indian philosophy, by and large, I would say it was Tiruvachakam of Manikavachakar. I mean, G.U. Pope is one popular name. We have several of them who attempted different phases of Manikavachakar's life and how that gets reflected into Tiruvachakam. Tiruvachakam is very, very emotional and it's very moving. Probably reasons again why it didn't become popular on common stage or performance arena here in India. But however, of course, Sri Ilayaraja sir's attempt in taking it out there and trying it out on symphony, that's one way of exploring it, and it is very deep, extremely emotional. That's why I probably think Tiruvambavai or Tiruvachakam for that matter has its exclusivity. 12th century, 10th century inscriptions which speaks about installation of bronze icons of these popular deities who've composed songs. Of the four popular ones, Appar, Sundarar, Manikavachakar and Sambandar, Manikavachakar he reserves a separate space. While all of the three, they are called as Moovar Mudaligal, or the three prominent ones, Manikavachakar is exclusively referred to in the inscriptions as Tiruvadavur Adigal, that great devotee from Tiruvadavur. That's his place of birth. So again, the works, while the works of the first three of them, they are all put together, compiled and called as Tevaram, Manikavachakar's compilation, it's called as Tiruvachakam and Tirukkovayar, which is again completely exclusive. So this exclusivity is reserved for Manikavachakar throughout for its matchless work. It's just very exclusive. One really needs to dwell deep into the translations at least to understand how moving, emotional, spiritual and philosophical Manikavachakar's works are.
So would you please tell our viewers a good English translation that they can access?
Several of them have tried their hands. Without moving far away from the traditions, I would say the translation of Sri T.N. Ramachandran sir is the best available one.
Published by?
Classical Institute of Tamil Studies
here,
and I think you can buy a copy. That to me is the best.
The best. Do you think, going back to, you were talking about Western English scholars who were so struck by Manikavachakar's poems and they attempted translation, several of them. Do you think that because his kind of soaked surrender to Shiva, the idea that in Shiva, the contemplation and the vision of Shiva was bliss for him, that these people who came from the Christian tradition, they were moved by it, that they found some kind of way in which they felt a closeness to it?
I think the 18th, 19th century philosophers, especially from the West, had this duty to study other religions as a part of their missionary duty, had to study the other religions, find similarities and differences, and probably come to conclusions telling that it's all an offspring of Christianity. They've done that with several religions, and so they have done it here also. That aside, I think their approach to Tiruvachakam seems very dedicated in most of their cases. And the translations kind of reflect it. Here and there, in many places in fact, they've tried their best to draw in similarities between Catholic traditions and the works here. but that's their own interpretation. A work like Tiruvachakam gives you a lot of scope to interpret it in the way you want, but the traditional interpretation should take precedence.
Because I think that if we talk of the role of religion, is to take us, I would say, beyond ourselves, right? To take us to a moment of, we could say, trance, or take us beyond ourselves. I think definitely Manikavachakar's words, even if you want it in Tamil or if you read a good English translation, seems to lead us in that path. So I won't be surprised if so many translators were struck by him. But is there anything else you would like to end with? Any other kind of incident, event, or one last miracle? You just share one miracle in this extraordinary life.
Mm-hmm.
Because you said that he attained his salvation when he was about 32.
Yep.
And then he started his writing. So the salvation is not the end of his life, right? It was the moment where where the dam from inside him burst.
Totally.
So he lived for another 20 years?
Roughly, yeah.
About 20 years, yeah.
32 as a number, you said. Okay, so there's this connect between 32 and his age. The first work that he composed is what is called a Shiva Purana, which speaks about the antiquity of Shiva. I mean, how ancient he is. Yeah, it just he pours his heart out and says, like, all these years, so many births I've taken, and I've crossed all that, and now I'm here. And he says, "Meyye un ponnadigal kandindru veedu train." In present tense, he says, in past tense, in fact, he says, I've attained salvation. After having had the glimpse of your divine feet, I've attained salvation. And he was 32 when this event happened. And I'm not sure if it's a coincidence, but it's too much for a coincidence. The 32nd line in Shiva Puranam is what I just said. Meyye un ponnadigal kandindru veedu train. So he was 32 when he composed this, and it was the 32nd line where he declares, I've attained salvation. That's an interesting coincidence, that matter. And several important people have been inspired by him. I'm told that Gandhiji also was moved by Tiruvachakam translations. Apparently he had time to read Tiruvachakam and he was in prisons in South Africa.
Oh.
So some translations he has read, and there is this anecdote which says that when I have time and when I learn and master Tamil, the first book that I would like to try on is Tiruvachakam. So that's how it has moved people of Gandhi and likes.
Thank you, Madhu. I just want to tell all of you that if you are not familiar with the words and the works of Manikavachakar, of course, the first thing that all of you will hit on Google will be, and it will come up on Wikipedia, but the information is woefully insufficient. And there's so much information in Tamil, but for all of you watching, you know that this is a poet that deserves attention and deserves to be studied, because even in the brief translations that Professor Madhusudhan has shared with us, there are some available on the net, and that could be a good place to start. And for those of you familiar with Andal's Tirupavai, you will see a remarkable resemblance in the tone. Remember, Professor said that he imagines himself to be a young girl when he writes the Tiruvempavai. So Andal was a young girl. Manikavachakar imagined himself in the feminine tense to be able to open up his inner channels to write the way he did. So I just want all of you to enjoy the rest of your Margari. We have just a few days left. I want to thank Madhu for joining us. And as always, I learn so much when I have any conversation with him. He is such a storehouse of information. And yes, he will be back with many more subjects. But for now, we end today's conversation. And please text us or DM me if you want any more information. And I will share the Professor Madhusudhan's Instagram handle, and you can contact him directly. Enjoy your evening. Thank you so much, Madhu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tadani da ತರಿದ